We're here today to explore predatory publishing and what kind of responses can the library and publishing community make to the efforts that are underway and how common predatory publishing has become. So I'm Julia Gelfi. I'm from the University of California at Irvine, and lots of things prompted why we assembled this topic and thought we would share it and get some insights from all of you. So just for some definition, we'll start. And everybody on the panel will introduce themselves as they kind of go through. What does predatory mean in the library and publishing ecosystem today? So if you kind of look where everybody begins, outside of us, but I chose that route, the Wikipedia, and we think of it in the OA context, we can sort of agree that it's probably an exploitative publishing model that involves charging publication fees to authors without providing the full range of editorial publishing services that we come to think of as associated with traditional and legitimate journals. And that, from at the top of that, is the rigorous peer review standards that encourage the replication of science, the replication of methodology, and the ability to conduct experiments, again, to determine legitimacy and outcomes. So, last week, the New York Times published an article on October 30th entitled, "Many Academics Are Eager to Publish in Worthless Journals." So even if the mainstream press, like the New York Times, is exploring how this suggests that the academic workforce increasingly dictates the fierce competition that has come to be associated with promotion and tenure and review, academic review, and how challenging it is to publish in leading high-impact journals, we're really worried about what the consequences of this are and what the library and scholarly communities and the publishing communities can do to help entering scholars and the next generation of scholars in determining what options they might have to make better selections and to get their ideas and scholarship published in non-predatory sources. So the increasing publications that are now contacting academics and writers at large are in often very flattering ways, perhaps encouraging them to submit titles and submit work with similar titles to journals with similar titles of the austere and legitimate mainstream press. Are leading one to conclude that the number of such journals has pretty much exploded, and that's been taken on as a title of articles in Nature and other journals, to an increase of more than 10,000 titles worldwide, defining it as an organized industry. And that's why we're here to help explore what options there might be. So the values of legitimacy are rooted in the practice of peer review, as I stated, but implication for pseudoscience is what worries us, or pseudo-anything, okay? So pseudo-medicine is very dangerous, or where published content cannot be replicated, and what those consequences might be. We bring a panel together today to present different stakeholders of libraries in the library community, from the collections perspective, scholarly communication, licensing, IP, and a publisher at a university press. We're all committed to working with our communities of students, faculty, researchers, to create pathways to partner to better inform these prospective authors about, and future generations of authors about predatory publishing and practices and the changing ecosystem of academic and scholarly publishing that we want to affirm. So with that, I'm going to share some encourage my co-panelists to share some ideas of how they're handling this at their institutions, within their organizations, and what the big picture is. And then we'll open it up for comments, questions, and your ideas.
Good morning, everyone. I think I actually don't want to hold this. Can you hear me? A little closer. How's that? Hi. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Brigitta Burris. I'm at the University of Pennsylvania Libraries. And like many of you in the audience, my background is in collections, and I'm hoping to bring that focus to the discussion today. I really do feel that the knowledge and experience that we bring as collections librarians is entirely relevant to addressing the predatory publishing issue. I think the solution to the problem of predatory publishing and really the lack of understanding of issues related to open access in general is one of awareness. And that's essentially an information literacy issue. And it's not just awareness among authors, but also among promotion and tenure committees, among faculty search committees, and among readers. As the publication of journals as open access necessarily removes some of the curatorial function that we perform as librarians through selection, through acquisition, and through discovery, there's now a need and really an opportunity for us to share some of that curatorial knowledge among these other bodies. So in particular, librarians who develop collections, we've developed a deep practiced expertise in how to assess the quality and various characteristics of journals, open access and otherwise. And these skills can be shared with our authors and committees as they consider the merits of various publishing venues. Most authors really have very little understanding of the consequences of one choice over another. So at my institution, the University of Pennsylvania, we're currently expanding what started as a small program, is an advisory program geared toward authors, in particular new and early career faculty and graduate students, that provides various data to allow an author to choose the best publishing venue for his or her work. So teaching authors to identify predatory journals is just one component of that service. The program features liaisons who've been trained to provide various descriptive criteria to our authors, such as the scope of a journal and the niche it fills within its field, various journal metrics relevant to that field, how broadly a journal is indexed and in which databases, if the journal's scholarly, trade, or popular, if it's peer-reviewed, the journal's availability of format, the journal's price, and hopefully this is an opportunity for us to give an explanation of how excessive price can influence the breadth of availability of a journal to its audience. So as we're raising the consciousness of our authors that they have choices they can make when it comes to publishing, I think the most important thing we need to keep in mind is that the average author is going to be motivated primarily by personal interests, and these interests really vary widely depending on the individual. So for example, early career scholars may be pressured to publish in particular journals in order to satisfy tenure requirements. That's a reality. Some authors may have fewer research funds to cover APCs and therefore be limited in their choice of open access publications. Some researchers may have their publication venue mandated to be open access by a funding agency. And for others, simply publishing quickly is going to be the most important factor in their choice of publication. So as librarians, we're in a position to advise our authors in ways that speak to those individual interests. So for example, some types of data we can provide include a journal's acceptance rates, the time to publication, submission policies, the cost of any APCs, types of Creative Commons licenses out there, types of open access that are available. Many authors are surprisingly uninformed of the benefits and the potential risks of publishing in open access journals. And that brings me to my final point, which is basically the subject of our talk today, and that's teaching authors how to identify specifically predatory journals. And I think my answer to that particular question is relatively brief, because I feel like it's just one component of a much broader service that we should be providing. I don't believe there's a panacea for identifying predatory journals, but critical thinking and basic fact-checking can go a long way, and both of these need to be informed by the types of data that we as librarians are in an ideal position to provide.
Good morning. I'm Lisa Macklin. I'm director of the Scholarly Communications Office at Emory University, and I would second everything that Gita has said and take us in perhaps a slightly different direction in talking about some of the partnerships that we've been able to form on campus. We have a medical school, a school of public health, a nursing school, and we are hearing from our faculty and their administrators real frustration of the bombardment that they feel from a lot of these publishers that we would deem to either be predatory or, I prefer the term, quite frankly, deceptive, and that they are concerned primarily for newer scholars who are not as familiar with publishing, they're not as experienced with publishing, and they are the ones often who are feeling the pressure not only of promotion and tenure, but also of grants and getting grants. And building that dossier and that CV to get not just this grant, but the next grant and the grant after that. And so some of the conversations that we have had on campus have been with the Office of Compliance, which you probably do have on your campus. If you haven't reached out to them, this is an opportunity to do that. They are concerned because their role around compliance gets into how federal monies are spent. And so they don't want to have federal grant money spent publishing in a journal that is not reputable. And they have a way to outreach to people who have grant funds on your campus and reach them in ways that maybe perhaps in the library you cannot. The other partnership that we've had has been with our School of Medicine. Myself, the director of the Health Sciences Center Library, and a deputy CIO for our campus had a meeting with the dean of the School of Medicine specifically around this topic, and it was at his request. And basically, his concern was reputation. It was his younger, newer faculty, but also reputation. And it centered not simply on predatory publishing, but also on invitations to conferences that are being offered by less than robust, shall we say, scholarly groups, and then also invitations to editorial boards, which for many faculty is a wonderful thing. It's a way they build their reputation. But if the editorial board is for a journal that isn't itself robust and scholarly, then that's actually a mark against them. And he gave an example of being on an advisory board where one of his faculty members was on the editorial board of a journal that had published an article that had been proven to be false. And he was very concerned about her reputation in relation to that journal and the fact that she was listed on that editorial board. So the education is not simply around publishing, but it is around this kind of ecosystem in general and really a concern for reputation building. So we have information on the Scholarly Communications site. There's information on our Health Sciences Center Library site. There's information from the Office of Compliance site, and there's information on our School of Medicine site. So we're really trying to kind of reach faculty in as many ways as we can and provide not just the services that Gita was talking about, but really work with faculty one-on-one if they have a question. And really, it can be a librarian in my office and our subject librarians, our Health Sciences Center librarians. I think really librarians do have a critical role to play in this analysis of journals. It's very easy to say it'd be nice to have a blacklist to just go to and say, this is a bad journal. But we all know that the reality is actually more nuanced than that. And it can be difficult, quite frankly, for faculty to really be able to discern these journals that have titles so similar to very reputable journals. And it can be hard to really determine what the publishing practices of that publisher really are. So with that, I will turn it over to John for a different perspective.
The publisher.
The publisher.
Not sure how I got looped into this, but although watch how I play a Zelig-like character and suddenly I'm going to be on their side very shortly. Watch this. So publishers look more predatory today because they've had to expand their value proposition. In the world of information, abundance, we're no longer the gatekeepers, right? So it used to be people came to us and we had this very clear role and value proposition. We owned the printing presses. It was kind of a great gig to have. But in the world of information abundance, publishers have had to figure out new ways to add value, and more complex ways of creating tolls for access. And the walls are down, and we're in what's called a mature business, which is a polite way of saying that it's never going to grow again, right? There's no more money to be added to the business. And squeezing collection development budgets might be a good short-term strategy for publishers, but it's just not a sustainable long-term one. And that's why publishers are expanding into services. So you're feeling this kind of creep from publishers in lots of different ways than simply we used to be content providers and now we're doing services and all types of things. And I think that makes us all a little uncomfortable. So I work at a university press. I didn't introduce myself. I'm John Cher. I'm the director of the University of North Carolina Press. We sit on the Chapel Hill campus, but we're an affiliate of the UNC system, so I technically have a relationship with 17 higher education institutions in the state of North Carolina. But we've also done work with other places. We've done some work with Emory, and we work with a lot of people. And I think university presses have a great opportunity in this kind of chaotic space. We're mission-driven. We're on the side of angels. But honestly, we've not been up to the task. So presses have the luxury of insulating themselves slightly from the scholarly communications ecosystem. We need some independence to do the credentialing and peer review that we do, so we can't be too closely tied to academic programs because we need to have the independence so that we can be kind of a fair arbiter in P&T. But frankly, I think a lot of presses, by the way, like UNC Press literally sits on Boundary Street in Chapel Hill. Like we're on campus, but like not of campus in this strange way. But we've I think kind of used that independence and embraced too much to not be part of some of the problems and the solutions that are going on campus. And I think you know, frankly, our business model is cost recovery for books and journals, and as I was saying before, that's mature. That's really not going to grow. And so we also at University Presses have to get in the business of services, and I think one of the services that we can do is helping to solve some of these problems. So, but presses we're just not set up to do that. We need to do what you would call capacity building. We have to become more prepared to do other types of things. So at UNC, I'm just going to talk for a minute about what we've tried to do. We're not there yet, but we're directionally correct. So we created something called the Office of Scholarly Publishing Services. So all the books that get published under the UNC Press imprint are peer-reviewed by the press editors and then credentialed by my board of governors, which is made up of academics. At OSPS, we created an office that partners with an institution within the UNC system. So we're not doing what I would call vanity publishing. If an individual comes to us and says, I want to publish this, we say, great, go find a department at the UNC system that will be the publisher, and the press will do kind of the back end, the plumbing, I always call it, of publishing. And so I was able to hire somebody. I went to the president of the UNC system. I said, I've got this idea. I think there's publishing going on throughout the UNC system. And here in Chapel Hill, we're just doing our little bespoke, monograph program. And we want to be better partners. And he actually gave me grant funding to hire somebody. And this person did kind of a environmental scan of everything. And 3 years later, it's almost a $2.5 million top-line business. We've done projects with 13 of the 17 campuses. And this is range from open access journals, paywall journals, conference proceedings. There's a couple of monograph programs that were actually going on that we didn't even know about throughout the UNC system. We've helped do it. And so at the press, we're learning how to do lots of different things. Every project is kind of a snowflake, and it takes a lot of effort to learn, what's the business model, what's the sustainability plan, if we're selling something, how do the splits go? But we've had this great experience where we've started writing checks to institutions in the UNC system, and it's a very funny thing to send a check to a library because they literally call me up and say, what am I supposed to do with this check? And I tell them about our donation program where they can give it back to the press. But and in fact, we've had a program with the Chapel Hill Library, the UNC Chapel Hill Library, called Documentary in the American South, which is this very interesting program. They have PDFs of these 19th century slave narratives, amongst other things, on their website. And they used to get, lots of people would come and ask them for print copies. And they're like, we're not in the business of print, but they talk to us. So I think we've republished, I think about 30 books in this program. So these PDFs are totally available. completely discoverable on the Doc South website on the library. We've sold about 4,000 print and EPUBs. We're selling EPUBs of free PDFs. And we're writing the 5-figure check back to the Chapel Hill Library every year. So there are real opportunities to think creatively. And I think the first challenge, like I said, at the press is to be prepared to do things besides traditional imprint publishing. And that's a hard thing for presses to do. It's hard enough to do that well, and to say we're also going to do other things is a real challenge. And frankly, I had to have lengthy conversations with my board about, how would the press's imprint be affected by this. They wanted to make sure I was not diminishing that brand in any sort of way. And so it's been a delicate thing, but it's been incredibly positive. And frankly, I think it's a completely extensible model. And I think, Charles, how many university presses are there in North America? 120-ish?
About 100 university presses.
Right. And so every librarian should have a press either in their orbit or very close to their orbit. And my advice is work with them.
So we've raised some questions, and we hope we've kind of given you some ideas of how different libraries of different sizes, private and public, are addressing these complex issues. And if anything, we predict that there's going to be more of it, and the ecosystem is going to complicate itself. Thank you. The ecosystem will continue to change and to develop, and we'll have different spikes and lulls in this. But we were opening, we raised some questions, and we hope that you have others as well. But we'd like to hear from your experiences what that might be. And Charles is going to help us by encouraging you to come to the mics and to, or we'll pass the mic around for you to share with us. Bob.
Good morning. Yes. I'm Bob Schatz with Springer Nature, but my question is really, I think, just from my librarian / private citizen cap. Couple of things. One comment is that I know from the working within the publishing enterprise that I do that there's a very international quality to this, and that while we have one conversation in the room about this here, that in other parts of the world it's really rampant, and there are some other factors that come into play, and I don't want to get into that too deeply, but that we should understand that this looks and behaves differently in different parts of the world. I'm wondering, because I'm not part of the academic institution, I just kind of hover around it in my career, whether one of the complicating factors isn't that there's kind of a shaming quality. It's almost like sexual harassment, that if as an academic you've been burned by a predatory publisher, that there's a stigma that goes with admitting that publicly in a way that might be helpful to some of your colleagues to avoid those publishers in the future, and whether that's an opportunity for scholarly communication librarians or others to create a kind of a protected forum that might vet those experiences to make sure that they really aren't just misunderstandings with reputable presses, but to be able to use the experience of those people who've been burned by predatory publishers in a way that'll help protect somebody down the road without it harming the person who's already been harmed. Does that make sense? Okay, so.
So I think you've brought up a good point, Bob, in that what we don't want to do is point a finger and basically say you got duped, even when we understand how easy that can be. One of the areas where we do have interactions with faculty around the reputation of publishers is our Open Access Publishing Fund. And for us, we will essentially include in any review of an application quality guidelines for the publisher. And that includes whether or not they're included in DOAJ, whether or not the publisher is a member of OASPA. And if neither of those is true, we will go and actually do an analysis of the publisher based on the OASPA membership criteria. Doing that is difficult because there are some things that it's just hard for someone looking on the outside in to determine. For example, one of the OASPA criteria is that the publisher take reasonable steps to identify papers and research that represent research misconduct. Well, it's almost impossible for us to know if the publisher is doing that, but that is something we would expect a reputable publisher to do. So if we turn down a journal for funding, which we have done on occasion, that then becomes a conversation with the faculty member or graduate student who applied for the funds. We will not ever tell a faculty member or a student they cannot publish in a journal. There are issues of academic freedom around that, and there may be some reason they have for publishing in that journal that is beyond what we may know or understand, but we will not fund it. And so what we can do then is explain what the alternatives may be, other venues that may be more appropriate, and have a discussion around the quality of the journal, et cetera. That's primarily where we kind of have that touch base where it's a moment for informing and educating, and I'll leave it there and see if you have anything to add.
To go back a little more closely to what Bob had suggested, I actually love this idea. I'm not sure how many faculty I'm going to get who want to volunteer themselves for all the reasons that you've already outlined, but the advisory program that I talked about that we have at Penn that we are really hoping to expand by the fall semester, that I would love for a faculty member to come and say, you know, to our new graduate students, our new early career faculty, don't get burned like I did, here's how it happened. I mean, I think that would actually be really effective, so thank you. Yeah.
Yes. Please. Hello, I'm Maggie Ansell from the University of Florida Health Science Center Libraries. So when it comes to predatory publishing, I do consider myself a bit of a subject expertise person. So we've mentioned a lot about how the expertise of librarians can be used in this area, but I do want to kind of narrow that a bit. If you bring a nursing journal to me, I can tell you within about half an hour whether it's something that's worth publishing in. If you brought me a monograph, I wouldn't know where to start. So I was kind of wanting to get your ideas or the ideas of the audience regarding how librarians can really actually expand and be as much of an expert as we sometimes claim to be when it comes to vetting things outside of our area that we're used to working with, whether it be monographs or the humanities, or especially as we move towards a more interdisciplinary publishing field. How can we partner with presses, with other faculty, with other librarians? You know, what ways can we expand our own expertise and make it so that the next time a nurse comes to me and asks me to vet a humanities monograph, I'm not staring blankly at them?
I think in some ways we're a bit lucky that the predatory practices haven't expanded quite as much into the monograph publishing world. But I do think that a lot of the sort of critical thinking and information that we can gather about a publication, it does apply both to journals and to books. I think that the press still continues to be, the quality of the press still continues to be a really good marker of the quality of the content published within it. And I'm not sure if John wants to add a little bit to that, but yeah, I mean, still relying on registers like the DOAB, for example. I think those are good for someone who doesn't know the field. Not thinking of anything else right now, so I'm gonna let John take it.
So I made this comment at another panel. The first thing I do when I sign a contract is commit to a $20,000 debt on a monograph, because that's basically what I lose for every monograph that I publish. So there's a reason why there's not a lot of predation in monograph publishing. Like, nobody wants market share in $20,000 debt opportunities. I came out of commercial or trade publishing, and I still cannot pretend to understand this kind of sub rosa hierarchy of credentialing that exists in monograph publishing, about how, you know, Like, I know people want to publish in Latin American studies at UNC and in Southern studies and things like that. I don't know why they don't want to publish in geography with us. It's like, there's this kind of very weird kind of thing that people know but don't talk about. I'll just say, this is, I mean, I'm single-minded about this, but university presses are mission-driven, and I feel like any university press imprint, it should just go on one side of the ledger for you, because again, we're definitely not doing this for cost recovery. And you can see it in our price points, and you can see it in the way that we work very hard. I mean, Charles and I have been part of this Charlotte Initiative conversation about new ways of licensing our content, and it's all about dissemination, about having better dissemination. And you know, when I was talking about what we're doing in our services division, it is this idea of publishing as a service rather than publishing as cost recovery. And I think ultimately that's one of the solutions for us, is to stop trying to like squeeze cost recovery dollars out. Our estimate is that it costs about $7,500 to credential a book, so not even the printing and copy editing and page designing, but actually just do the peer review and what the editor does to acquire a book. And so, you know, when we talk about, you know, kind of supply-sided models of funding, you know, those are the kind of dollars that you're talking about ahead of time. But
Do you want to talk about OAN?
you know, Charles would actually be a better person to talk about the. Yes, you would. Well, you're a participant.
No. What's the question?
About the new the AAU ARL AAP.
You want me to talk about it?
I actually have mixed feelings about it, so someone should start, and then I can.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say that the Open Access Monograph Publishing Initiative of ARL, AAU, and AAUP has as a criteria that basically well, I won't say it has as a criteria. Emory, as a participant in that, as well as having some Mellon funding to kind of explore this, has set as a criteria for paying a subvention for publishing an open access monograph that the publisher be a member of AAUP. So that is one kind of quality criteria that we use. We will also fund commercial publishers and others, but again, we're looking for peer review. We could potentially ask for reader reports, those kinds of things to essentially have quality criteria before paying a subvention for a monograph. And the price is different. I mean, it's $15,000 is the kind of baseline set as part of the OAMP initiative. So when there's more money on the table, you know, the scrutiny can perhaps be higher, but that might be one way of kind of discerning, as John said, mission-driven publishers as university presses versus some other publishers.
So we have quite a few questions built up. There's a gentleman here, then a lady there, and then John Dunn, and then it's Sophie. So,
Hi, Craig Van Dyke from the Clocks Archive. We feel your pain because we have publishers, especially open access publishers, coming to us wanting to archive their content with us. It's a mark of respectability to be archived by Clocks or other preservation archives. And sometimes we're concerned about the publisher who is approaching us, but we don't really have a way to vet them other than the ways you've been talking about. There's the famous or infamous Beals list, which gets older every day. There's also cabals, and I'm not here to market cabals, but I do want, since nobody's mentioned them, they have stepped up and said, we have a white list, we have a black list. I think their coverage is not especially complete, but they are a sort of neutral third party, and I would recommend that when you have these bad experiences, or your faculty does, to share that information with cabals, perhaps confidentially. I think one of the missing links here is a central resource, and I think people are rightly concerned about the sensitivity, may have legal ramifications, for example. And I don't know how cabals is perceived in the library community, but they or someone like them who would step up to be a kind of third party to collect this information would be helpful.
Question.
well, I would be interested about your thoughts on cabals.
Well, I can just say say my personal experience at the University of California at Irvine has been a slow one with Cabell's in terms of communication with them. We'd like to look at a trial. We'd like to see what it looks like. We'd like to see what the difference is between white and black, and is there a gray method? I come from the gray literature community, and we're kind of trying to see what those definitions are. That has not been forthcoming after numerous tries, and the price tag associated with it for an institutional subscription is not what I would call inconsequential or incidental. So that's been my situation. We have not licensed it. We have not tried it, so I haven't personally seen it. But the communication has been a bit strained for somebody who's trying to, for an organization that's trying to sell new product lines. We find that a bit curious.
I'll actually reiterate that same sentiment. Is anyone from Cabell's here by any chance? We've been trying to get a trial for the last 6 months, and we can't get anyone to write back to us. I was actually very surprised a few weeks ago when there was some press about Cabell's and clocks cooperating. It surprised me, yeah.
You had to respond. Oh, yeah. So, and there's another comment about someone who has heard back.
Great.
Yeah, just this past week, we got a license for a 7-day trial. Oh, I'm sorry, Eric Hartnett from Texas A&M. So I inquired about getting a trial, and they sent us a license, and it's only a 7-day trial. We haven't done it yet.
Okay.
And you've had an experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm Robin from Hopkins, and we've been just trying to start a subscription to their metrics package for 6 months, and we don't have it. And we have money to give them.
Okay. So we had a question down here from this lady.
Please.
Oh, sorry, you have a microphone.
Oh, I do. Hi, I'm Lisa Rose Miles. I'm the Science and Health Sciences Librarian at Seton Hall. First, I reiterate, yes, I get a lot of questions from faculty about where to publish.
Hi, hello.
It's on.
It's on? It's on. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Anyway, my name is Dawn Mick, and I'm from Iowa State University. And actually, to follow up to that question, do you have any suggestions for convincing your coworkers that the
I thought, gee, I changed my accent. Is this mic working? Okay, so anyway, I get a lot of questions from faculty about where to publish, which I'm, fairly good at, and I also look, is something indexed in Web of Science or Scopus and various things. But to take this in a slightly different direction, recently I've been getting questions from faculty about sources that their students, and particularly graduate students, are citing. And they have concerns about that. So I don't know if anybody's had any experience with looking into what journals are being indexed in different databases, particularly in discovery services, how students are finding these things. Because one thing that concerns me, it's even more nuanced, because not all articles published in predatory journals are necessarily bad. I mean, the editing may be bad, but it doesn't necessarily mean the article's bad. So it adds a whole level of complexity. And I don't know if anybody else has dealt with it, or if any publishers or database vendors are considering the standards of what we actually index. So I'd be really interested to hear on that question.
The concern that we have heard, and I think it is a legitimate one, is many of our faculty and students rely, as I'm sure yours do, on PubMed. And kind of PubMed is the Bible, if you will. Because of PubMed Central, there are now journals being included in PubMed Central that would not necessarily meet the criteria that has been set out for inclusion in PubMed. And that is causing confusion as well. And so I think the waters are getting murkier rather than clearer around that. And I think the evaluation of an individual article is itself its own challenge that's separate from evaluating the journal in which it is published. And so I think that gets to some of the same kind of information literacy around fake news and other things where, applying some critical thinking to analyzing the value of the research. Do you want to add anything, Julia? Kind of
I
your-
think the public service aspects of this, the reference interface, we're seeing a lot of criteria, and we're sort of suggesting that when we explored this with students, that their sourcing of it is from Google and Google Scholar. And that is not, you know, it's not a transparent situation of what a criteria for inclusion or discovery is. With these new discovery systems, we're also seeing the metadata is abundantly, you know, kind of integrated from many sources, and you have to make sure what your sourcing is. Now, and some of them, I understand you can, I'm not on the technical side of the house, but I understand that you can define that and include what you want, streams that are, you know, your preferences. However, I believe we're going to see more of this as it's as there are more journals that are questionable. And I think the problem, I recently did a search for a student, a graduate student, about whether they should cite a particular article, and we found 9 journals with different permutations of 4 words. Okay? And so there was a very legitimate Springer publication, and that had a long history, and then permutations of that from throughout the world, and it was very hard. And the same effort on this, since I knew the field a little bit, I found my name associated on an editorial board, and not at the specific campus, but it was Julia Gelfand at the University of California. I mean, that should give you an indication. There are 10 campuses. They all have unique identities. They all have, you know, unique properties. And that was a bit disturbing. And then when I pursued that, I'm still not getting my name off their website. And I never gave permission. I've never been asked for anything. And that sort of started this kind of inquiry. But you saw the permutations of that just from doing these simple exercises or helping somebody gain insights. And I think that's, you know, the reference work associated with this can be laborious, and it can take you in different directions. But it started out with a Google search.
So we have 3 questions lined up.
Please.
We might be able to get to the next 5 minutes. So John first, then this lady, and then that lady last.
Yeah, my name's John Dava. Actually, my first window into predatory publishing was about 2.5 years ago, and my son in Slovakia, he teaches American Studies there. He had come under the impression, which is actually pretty common, that any publisher who asks for APC must be a fraud. So this is a very broad brush to paint on this, and actually it's been pointed out as what some of the problems were with Beale's list, because it was just focusing on open access, and it tended to be a little bit too broad a swipe, and some people were put on it and then appealed and then got off. But so when Cabell's came about, I called them up and asked them about how they were going to go about this, and they said indeed they were preparing for a blacklist, and they wanted to actually fix some of the things that were wrong with Cabell's list. You know, that it was one individual, there was no clear appeal process, everything else. And I believe that their whitelist includes subscription journals, not just open access. And their blacklist allegedly includes both. I would have to say that having a blacklist that is secret, that's probably the only thing worse than having a one-person blacklist. Because it seems to me that if it's a blacklist, it ought to be something that's verifiable information that's then made available to people. So what I did at that time, and this was about 1.5 years ago, I called and set up an appointment with Skip Pritchard, the CEO of OCLC. I figured in all of these conversations, where is the organization of librarians that could actually create some kind of curated group of subject librarians in each subject who could actually do some assessment of quality and do so in a way that was respectful and not sort of reacting to somebody who had an individual complaint, but really looking at things in a much more nuanced way, not just sort of some misbehavior, but stuff that was on the far end really fraudulent misrepresentation, on the near end maybe, you know, sending emails to somebody.
What did he say?
So he said, everybody has ideas about what I could do, but they rarely have a way of telling me how I'm going to make money doing it. So,
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Julia Damo from Mount Holyoke College, and I was wondering if you could talk a little about who and what is behind all of these many thousands of predatory journals. Feels kind of like a black box and like this thing that we talk about that's behind a big curtain, and I understand it's a gray area, but I'm just curious if you might be able to fill out that picture a little bit about sort of who's on the other side of all this.
And this will be our last question.
Well, I think from my perspective, the answer to that question is that it's profit-driven, and it is a way to not have big startup expenses to do that. And it's also very prestigious to be a publisher. And I think that worldwide sense is embodies this and promotes it. But I think it's considered fast money. People will write a check for $1,500, get a publication, and put it someplace. And if you read the New York Times article, it cited many cases of people who found it the chain to success in their academic reviews to build, length. So I think that's part of the central reason we're here is to work with that process. But I think the question of why these are proliferating so much is the startup expenses are not that great, and it's all online now.
There's also, I mean, publishers get beat up for being, not forward-looking, and so there's a sense of, new models and new ways of dissemination are more progressive, and us kind of dusty old university presses and profit-driven, big houses are not, solving the problems, and so I think there's also kind of a bias towards potential new models. But ironically, I mean, as I was talking about, information abundance before, I mean, the only value that I think this is where university presses and librarians completely align is in credentialing and filtering, right? So it's our ability to take the mass of communication and to filter it. And frankly, to be in the business of saying no, which is what we do mostly at UNC Press, has value, and to kind of double down on that. And I know that sounds counter to the idea of disseminating as much information as possible. And so it's this kind of, I think young scholars kind of wrestle with that. Am I going to go with someone who's going to, get me published right away and promise that it's available in lots of places, or am I going to do, kind of what the generation before me did?
And on that note, the end.